Today, we journey into the haunting world of Bloodborne to explore one of its most compelling and tragic figures, Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower. Over the next couple hours, we'll uncover the complete story of this noble hunter, from her aristocratic origins in Cainhurst to her final stand in the hunter's nightmare. We'll examine her role in the Fishing Hamlet massacre, her time as caretaker of the research hall patients, and the profound guilt that ultimately led to her downfall. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this melancholic journey through one of From Software's most beautifully crafted character arcs. Chapter 1: Origins in Cainhurst. To understand Lady Maria's story, we must first examine her origins in the noble house of Cainhurst. According to both her equipment descriptions and the lore surrounding her weapon, Lady Maria was born into the aristocratic bloodline of Cainhurst Castle, making her a distant relative to Queen Annalise, the immortal ruler of the Vile Bloods. This connection places Maria within one of the most prestigious and simultaneously cursed lineages in all of Gehrman's history. Cainhurst Castle stands as a monument to aristocratic excess and the corruption of noble blood. The very architecture of the castle speaks to centuries of accumulated power and the gradual descent into something far removed from ordinary humanity. The Cainhurst nobles were renowned for their mastery of blood magic, techniques that allowed them to manipulate their own vital essence for both combat and ceremonial purposes. These blood arts were considered the pinnacle of aristocratic achievement, a mark of both breeding and power that separated the noble class from common folk. Yet Maria was different from her noble kin in ways that would prove both defining and tragic. While her bloodline granted her the inherent ability to manipulate blood magic, Maria found herself fundamentally opposed to these practices. The description of her beloved weapon, the Rakuyo, provides crucial insight into her character. A trick weapon crafted by the workshop heretics, the powder kegs. A special weapon forged by the workshop heretics, the powder kegs, and one of the trick weapons of the workshop. The Rakuyo is a hunter's weapon that requires both dexterity and skill, as opposed to blood blades, which are easy to use but eat away at one's very essence. This rejection of blood magic in favor of skill-based combat tells us something profound about Maria's character. In a society where power was measured by one's ability to manipulate blood, Maria chose the more difficult path of pure technique and dexterity. The Rakuyo, with its elegant dual-blade design, demanded years of training to master effectively. It was a weapon that could not be enhanced through supernatural means, relying entirely on the wielder's physical prowess and combat expertise. This trick sword, originating from the same eastern country as the Chikaja, stood apart from other Cainhurst weapons by feeding not off blood, but instead demanding great dexterity. The weapon itself is a masterwork of Eastern craftsmanship that originated in the same country as the Cainhurst Chikage, designed as both a single katana-like blade and a dual-wielding combination when transformed. Its name, meaning fallen leaves in Japanese, carries a poetic weight that would prove prophetic when we consider Maria's ultimate fate. The Rakuyo's design philosophy perfectly embodied Maria's approach to combat. Graceful, precise, and deadly through skill, rather than supernatural augmentation. Maria's preference for this weapon over the blood blades favoured by her aristocratic peers suggests a fundamental philosophical difference with Cainhurst society, where her noble relatives embraced the corruption of their essence in exchange for power. Maria maintained a purity of purpose that would later attract the attention of Gehrman, the first hunter. This early rejection of blood magic would become both her greatest strength and, paradoxically, the source of her deepest shame when she would later embrace the very power she had spent her life rejecting. The social implications of Maria's choices cannot be understated. In Cainhurst society, refusing to utilize one's noble blood was tantamount to rejecting one's birthright. It was a statement that traditional power structures were flawed, that there was a better way to achieve strength and purpose. This rebellious streak would ultimately lead Maria away from the insular world of Cainhurst and toward the broader conflicts that plagued Gehrman. Her departure from Cainhurst represents more than just a personal journey. It symbolizes the rejection of an entire way of life. The Cainhurst nobles were, in many ways, trapped by their own power. Their blood magic, while granting them significant abilities, also bound them to increasingly corrupt practices. Maria's choice to leave represents a quest for something purer, more noble in the truest sense of the word. Yet even as she rejected Cainhurst's methods, Maria could never fully escape her heritage. The noble bearing that marked all of Cainhurst's children remained with her throughout her time as a hunter. Her refined fighting style, her aristocratic manner of speech, and her natural leadership abilities all stemmed from her noble upbringing. In many ways, Maria carried the best aspects of Cainhurst nobility while rejecting its darker impulses. This internal conflict between her noble heritage and her moral convictions would become a defining theme throughout Maria's story. She was simultaneously elevated by her aristocratic background and constrained by it, blessed with exceptional abilities while bearing the weight of noble responsibility. Her tragic arc begins with this fundamental tension between what she was born to be and what she chose to become. The decision to leave Cainhurst and join the Hunters represents the first truly independent choice we see Maria make. It was a decision that would set her on a path toward both greatness and ultimate tragedy, establishing the pattern of noble intentions leading to devastating consequences that would define her entire story. Chapter 2. The First Hunter's Student. Maria's departure from Cainhurst led her to one of the most significant relationships of her life, her apprenticeship under Gehrman, the First Hunter. This mentorship would shape not only her combat abilities, but also her fundamental understanding of what it meant to be a hunter in the dark streets of Gehrman. The relationship between master and student, however, carried complexities that would have far-reaching consequences for both individuals. Gehrman, already legendary by the time Maria sought his tutelage, represented everything that hunting could be at its most noble. He was the architect of the hunter's workshop, the creator of many of the trick weapons that would become synonymous with the hunt, and the individual who established many of the codes and practices that governed hunter behavior. For a young noble seeking to make her mark outside the traditional power structures of Cainhurst, Gehrman offered both validation and direction. The training Maria received under Gehrman was comprehensive and demanding. Hunter combat required not just physical prowess, but also deep understanding of beast behavior, knowledge of Gehrman's labyrinthine streets and hidden passages, and the mental fortitude to face horrors that could drive ordinary people to madness. Maria excelled in all these areas, displaying a natural aptitude that impressed even the experienced first hunter. Her combat style, refined under Gehrman's guidance, became a thing of beauty and terror. The Rakuyo, already a demanding weapon, became an extension of Maria's will under Gehrman's instruction. She learned to flow between the weapon's forms seamlessly, using the single blade configuration for precise strikes and the dual blade form for overwhelming combinations. Her technique emphasized mobility, precision, and timing over brute force, perfectly complementing her aristocratic grace with deadly effectiveness. More than just combat training, Gehrman instilled in Maria the philosophical foundations of hunting. The hunt, as Gehrman taught it, was not merely about killing beasts. It was about protecting humanity, preserving civilization, and standing as a bulwark against the chaos that threatened to consume Gehrman. This noble purpose resonated deeply with Maria's own moral convictions, providing her with a sense of meaning that her aristocratic background had never offered. The workshop itself became Maria's second home, a place where she could work alongside other dedicated hunters in pursuit of their shared mission. She learned weapon maintenance, studied beast anatomy, and contributed to the development of hunting techniques that would be passed down to future generations. Her noble education proved valuable here, as her literacy and analytical skills helped document and systematize much of the hunter's accumulated knowledge. However, the relationship between Maria and Gehrman carried an undercurrent that would prove significant in ways neither could have anticipated. Gehrman, despite his legendary status and imposing presence, developed what the lore describes as a curious mania toward his star pupil. This attraction went far beyond professional admiration or even friendship, becoming an obsession that Gehrman himself may not have fully understood. Maria, for her part, seemed largely unaware of the depth of Gehrman's feelings. She admired her mentor greatly, viewing him as the embodiment of everything noble about the hunt. Her respect was genuine and profound, but it remained within the bounds of a student's gratitude toward a teacher. This asymmetry in their relationship would become tragically significant after Maria's eventual death, when Gehrman's unresolved feelings would manifest in the creation of the doll. During this period, Maria established herself as one of the most promising hunters of her generation. Her noble bearing, combined with her exceptional combat skills and unwavering moral compass, made her a natural leader among her peers. Other hunters looked to her for guidance and inspiration, seeing in her the possibility that hunting could remain a noble calling, despite the increasingly dark directions the profession was taking. The influence of Maria's aristocratic background remained evident in her approach to hunting. She maintained certain standards and protocols that other hunters might have considered unnecessary luxuries. Her equipment was always meticulously maintained. Her appearance remained dignified even after the most challenging hunts, and she insisted on treating even beast victims with a degree of respect and dignity that spoke to her noble upbringing. This period represents the height of Maria's happiness and sense of purpose. She had successfully escaped the stifling atmosphere of Cainhurst while finding a new calling that utilized her skills and satisfied her moral convictions. She was respected by her peers, valued by her mentor, and contributing meaningfully to the protection of humanity. The tragic irony is that this golden period was setting the stage for the devastating events that would ultimately destroy everything she held dear. The techniques and principles Maria learned during this time under Gehrman's tutelage would remain with her throughout her life, even into death. Her fighting style, her approach to problem solving, and her fundamental understanding of duty and sacrifice all trace back to these formative years in the workshop. The tragedy of her story lies partly in how thoroughly she absorbed Gehrman's teachings, as it was this very dedication to the hunt's noble ideals that would make her eventual compromises all the more devastating. As we shall see, the strong foundation of purpose and technique that Gehrman provided would both enable Maria's greatest achievements and make her ultimate failures all the more tragic. The very qualities that made her an exceptional hunter would also make her acutely sensitive to the moral compromises that the hunt increasingly demanded. Chapter 3: The Scholar's Mission. The turning point in Maria's story begins with her involvement in one of the most significant and morally ambiguous expeditions in Yharnam's history: the scholarly mission to the Fishing Hamlet, organized by the academics of Byrgenwerth. This expedition would not only change the course of Maria's life, but would also set in motion events that would echo through the nightmares of hunters for generations to come. Byrgenwerth, under the leadership of Provost Willem, had long been obsessed with the concept of human evolution and transcendence. Willem believed that humanity could only progress by gaining eyes on the inside, a metaphorical and literal process of expanding consciousness to comprehend truths beyond normal human understanding. This pursuit of knowledge had led the scholars to investigate numerous reports of unusual phenomena throughout the region, but none would prove as significant as the discovery of the Fishing Hamlet. The Fishing Hamlet was a remote seaside community that had, according to reports reaching Byrgenwerth, been visited by something extraordinary, a great one. The cosmic beings that existed beyond normal reality had appeared in their waters. Specifically, the corpse of Kos, a maternal great one of immense power, had washed ashore on their beaches. The implications of this discovery were staggering for scholars who had devoted their lives to understanding these otherworldly entities. Kos represented something unprecedented in the scholar's experience. Most great ones were encountered as living entities, alien and incomprehensible, but undeniably active. Kos, however, had arrived as a corpse, making her the first great one that could be studied directly without the immediate danger that typically accompanied such encounters. For Willem and his followers, this represented an unparalleled opportunity to unlock the secrets of transcendence. The body of Kos brought with it more than just the promise of knowledge. Embedded within her corpse were millions of parasites, otherworldly organisms that had lived symbiotically with the Great One during her lifetime. These parasites, when exposed to the human population of the Fishing Hamlet, had begun to transform the villagers in extraordinary ways. The fishermen and their families were developing new sensory capabilities, altered physiology, and what appeared to be enhanced consciousness. Most significantly, Kos carried within her womb an unborn child, the orphan of Kos. This represented something even more valuable to the scholars than the Great One herself. The possibility of studying a Great One from the moment of birth, understanding their development, and perhaps even influencing their growth. The umbilical cord of this unborn Great One was particularly sought after, as these cords were known to be powerful artifacts, capable of facilitating human transcendence. When word of these discoveries reached Bergenworth, Willem immediately organized an expedition to investigate and acquire these treasures. However, the scholars recognized that such a mission would require more than academic expertise. The journey to the remote hamlet was dangerous, and the acquisition of such valuable specimens might require forceful persuasion. This was where the hunters came in. Gehrman, as the first hunter and Willem's trusted ally, was approached to provide hunter support for the expedition. The official justification was protection and escort for the scholars, but there were unspoken implications about what might be required once they reached their destination. Gehrman, despite any reservations he might have had, agreed to support the mission and selected several of his most trusted hunters to accompany the scholars. Maria was among the hunters chosen for this crucial mission. Her selection was a testament to her skills and the trust Gehrman placed in her abilities. She was seen as reliable, capable, and possessing the moral fortitude necessary to handle whatever challenges the expedition might encounter. It was meant to be an honor, recognition of her status among the elite hunters of her generation. The expedition party that set out for the Fishing Hamlet represented some of the most influential figures in Yharnam's academic and hunting communities. Along with Willem and Gehrman, the group likely included other prominent scholars who would later become founding members of the Healing Church, as well as several of the most skilled hunters of the era. Maria found herself in prestigious company, part of what was being presented as a historic scholarly endeavor. The journey to the Fishing Hamlet was undertaken with high expectations and noble intentions, at least from Maria's perspective. She understood the mission as one of discovery and learning, an opportunity to expand human knowledge and potentially benefit all of Yharnam with whatever insights could be gained. The possibility that the expedition might require violence likely seemed remote to her at the outset. However, as the expedition progressed toward its destination, the true nature of what they were undertaking would become increasingly clear. The scholars' interest in the Great One and her offspring went far beyond mere academic curiosity. They intended to acquire specimens, conduct experiments, and extract whatever knowledge they could from both the corpse of Kos and her unborn child. The methods they were prepared to employ to achieve these goals would test every moral conviction that Maria held dear. The stage was set for the most traumatic and defining experience of Maria's life. The noble hunter who had rejected the blood magic of her aristocratic heritage was about to participate in an atrocity that would make her previous moral compromises seem trivial by comparison. The very dedication to duty and loyalty to her mentor that had made her such an exemplary hunter would now compel her to participate in acts that would haunt her for the rest of her existence. Chapter 4. The Fishing Hamlet Massacre. The arrival of the Byrgenwerth expedition at the Fishing Hamlet marked the beginning of one of the most horrific atrocities in Bloodborne's lore, an event so traumatic that it would curse hunters for generations and ultimately create the hunter's nightmare itself. For Maria, this expedition would transform from what she believed to be a noble scholarly mission into the defining tragedy of her existence. The Fishing Hamlet, when the expedition arrived, was unlike anything the hunters and scholars had previously encountered. The village had been fundamentally transformed by its proximity to Kos and her parasites. The villagers, once ordinary fishermen and their families, had undergone radical physiological changes that reflected their exposure to the Great One's influence. Their bodies had elongated and taken on aquatic characteristics. Their heads had developed unusual proportions, and many displayed sensory capabilities far beyond normal human parameters. Yet despite these physical transformations, the villagers retained their essential humanity. They continued to live as a community, maintaining their homes, caring for their families, and worshipping Kos as a benevolent deity who had blessed them with her presence. To them, the changes they had undergone were not curses, but gifts, signs of divine favor that had elevated them above ordinary human limitations. The corpse of Kos herself lay on the village's beach, a massive form that dwarfed anything the expedition members had previously seen. Even in death, she radiated an otherworldly presence that was both beautiful and terrifying. Her body contained the unborn orphan, still connected by the umbilical cord that the scholars so desperately sought. The parasites that had once lived within her had spread throughout the village, creating an ecosystem of transformed life that represented unprecedented opportunities for study. Initially, the expedition may have attempted diplomatic contact with the villagers. The scholars, after all, were academics rather than conquerors, and they may have hoped to gain cooperation through negotiation or compensation. However, the villagers' relationship with Kos was deeply spiritual and protective. They viewed her not as a specimen to be studied, but as a beloved deity whose rest should not be disturbed. Any suggestion of removing or experimenting upon her remains would have been met with fierce resistance. The exact sequence of events that led to violence remains somewhat unclear in the lore, but the outcome was unambiguous. The expedition turned into a massacre. The scholars, determined to acquire their specimens regardless of the villagers' objections, authorized the use of force to achieve their goals. The hunters, bound by loyalty to their mission and their superiors, found themselves tasked with overcoming the villagers' resistance by any means necessary. For Maria, this moment represented the complete collapse of everything she had believed about the hunt and her role within it. The noble calling that had drawn her away from Cainhurst's corruption had itself become corrupted, demanding that she participate in the slaughter of innocent people whose only crime was protecting something they held sacred. The skills she had developed to protect humanity were now being used to destroy a unique human community for the sake of academic ambition. The villagers, despite their transformations, were no match for trained hunters. Their altered physiology may have granted them certain advantages, but they lacked the combat training, weapons, and tactical knowledge that the expedition possessed. What followed was not a battle, but a systematic extermination, as the hunters methodically eliminated anyone who stood between the scholars and their objectives. The scholars themselves participated directly in the atrocities, conducting brutal experiments on living villagers in their quest for knowledge. The accursed brew, an item that can be found in the DLC, reveals the horrific nature of these experiments. The skull of a villager was forcibly opened and searched for eyes on the inside, as Willem had instructed. No such eyes were found, but the process left the villager's head a grotesque, bubbling mass. Maria watched as her fellow hunters and the scholars systematically violated every principle she had once held sacred. The dignified pursuit of knowledge became a carnival of cruelty, with living beings treated as nothing more than specimens to be dissected and studied. The protective mission of hunting became an exercise in genocide, with an entire community destroyed to satisfy academic curiosity. The aftermath of the massacre was equally horrific. The scholars harvested what they wanted from Koss's corpse, including the umbilical cord of her unborn child. They collected specimens from the transformed villagers, documented their findings, and prepared to return to Bergenworth with their prizes. The surviving structures of the village were left as monuments to what had been destroyed, while the few remaining villagers were left to mourn their losses in isolation. For Maria, the psychological impact of these events was devastating. She had not merely witnessed atrocities, she had been an active participant in them. Her hands were stained with the blood of innocents. Her skills had been perverted to serve evil ends, and her trust in the institutions she had served had been utterly shattered. The noble purpose that had given meaning to her life had been revealed as a facade concealing something monstrous. The return journey to Gehrman was marked by a profound change in Maria's demeanor. Her fellow expedition members noted that she had become withdrawn and silent, no longer participating in discussions about their discoveries or the potential applications of what they had learned. The vibrant, enthusiastic hunter who had departed for the fishing hamlet had been replaced by someone haunted by what she had seen and done. The trauma of the fishing hamlet would remain with Maria for the rest of her life, coloring every subsequent decision and ultimately leading to her final act of desperation. The expedition had succeeded in its stated objectives, acquiring valuable specimens and knowledge that would advance the scholars' understanding of the Great Ones. But for Maria, this success came at a cost that would prove impossible to bear. The massacre at the fishing hamlet represents the moment when Bloodborne's law shifts from ambiguous moral complexity to clear condemnation of the pursuit of knowledge without ethical constraints. It serves as the foundational sin that would eventually curse all hunters, creating the nightmare that traps them in eternal cycles of violence and guilt. For Maria specifically, it marked the beginning of the end, the first step on a path that would lead inevitably to her suicide and her eternal role as guardian of secrets too terrible to be revealed. Chapter 5. The Weight of Guilt. The return from the fishing hamlet marked the beginning of Maria's slow psychological deterioration, a process that would ultimately consume the noble hunter who had once embodied everything admirable about the profession. The weight of what she had witnessed and participated in proved to be a burden far heavier than any physical weapon she had ever carried, crushing her spirit with an inexorable force that no amount of skill or training could overcome. In the immediate aftermath of the expedition, Maria's behavior underwent subtle but significant changes that were noticed by her fellow hunters, and, most particularly, by Gehrman. The confidence and enthusiasm that had characterized her approach to hunting began to fade, replaced by a haunted quality that seemed to permeate her every action. Where once she had embraced challenges with eagerness, she now approached them with grim resignation, as if going through the motions of a life that had lost its meaning. The first major symbolic act of Maria's psychological breakdown was her disposal of the Rakuyo, the weapon that had defined her identity as a hunter. According to the law, she threw the beloved blade down a well, unable to bear the sight of the instrument that had been used in the massacre. This was not merely the discarding of a tool, it was the rejection of everything the weapon represented: her skills, her purpose, her identity as a hunter, and her connection to the noble ideals that had once motivated her. The Rakuyo had been more than just a weapon to Maria. It had been a symbol of her rejection of Cainhurst's blood magic in favor of pure skill and technique. Its elegant design and demanding mastery requirements had perfectly embodied her personal philosophy of achieving greatness through dedication and moral clarity rather than supernatural shortcuts. To abandon it represented the complete collapse of the worldview that had sustained her since leaving her noble heritage behind. Gehrman, witnessing his prized student's decline, was deeply affected by Maria's transformation. The woman he had trained and admired was disappearing before his eyes, replaced by someone consumed by guilt and despair. His attempts to reach her, to provide comfort or counsel, seemed to fall on deaf ears. Maria had retreated into herself, unable to articulate the depth of her trauma or accept help from anyone who had been connected to the expedition. The broader hunter community also felt the impact of Maria's change. As one of their most respected members, her obvious distress sent ripples through the organization. Other hunters began to question the missions they were being asked to undertake, wondering if they too might be asked to participate in actions that would compromise their moral foundations. The expedition's success had come at a cost that was becoming increasingly apparent to those who had witnessed its aftermath. During this period, Maria made a decision that would define the final phase of her life. She accepted a position overseeing the research hall, a secretive facility operated by the Healing Church, where experiments were conducted on human subjects in attempts to facilitate contact with the Great Ones. This choice was likely motivated by a desperate desire for redemption, an attempt to find some way to balance the scales after her participation in the Fishing Hamlet massacre. The research hall represented, in Maria's mind, an opportunity to protect and care for experimental subjects rather than harm them. The patients housed within the facility were volunteers who had submitted themselves to dangerous procedures in hopes of achieving transcendence or gaining communion with cosmic forces. Unlike the unwilling victims of the Fishing Hamlet, these individuals had chosen their fate, which may have made Maria feel that her guardianship of them was a form of atonement. However, the reality of the research hall proved to be another source of moral compromise rather than redemption. The experiments conducted there were brutal and dehumanizing, transforming the volunteer subjects into grotesque parodies of their former selves. Their heads were enlarged through the injection of mysterious fluids. Their bodies were subjected to painful procedures, and many died in agony as a result of the treatments they received. Maria found herself in the position of overseeing and, to some extent, facilitating these experiments while simultaneously trying to provide what comfort she could to the suffering patients. The small acts of kindness she was able to offer, such as giving Adeline a key to a balcony where she might enjoy fresh air and the scent of flowers, were drops of humanity in an ocean of institutional cruelty. The patients themselves came to view Maria with something approaching religious devotion. They called her Lady Maria with reverence and looked to her as a mother figure who provided care and comfort in their darkest hours. This adoration only added to Maria's psychological burden, as she knew that her presence in the facility made her complicit in their suffering, regardless of whatever small mercies she was able to provide. The psychological tension of Maria's position was extraordinary. She was simultaneously protector and collaborator, caregiver and enabler of abuse. Her genuine desire to help the patients was constantly undermined by her institutional role in facilitating their torment. The small acts of kindness she performed served more to highlight the enormity of the cruelty surrounding them than to provide meaningful relief. As time passed, the cumulative weight of Maria's compromises began to take an increasingly visible toll. Her noble bearing remained, but it was now accompanied by a profound sadness that seemed to emanate from her very soul. The vibrant, purposeful hunter who had once inspired her peers had been replaced by someone going through the motions of life while being slowly consumed by guilt and despair. The patient's devotion to Maria, while genuinely felt, also served as a constant reminder of her failures. Their trust and affection highlighted the contrast between the person she wanted to be and the role she was actually playing in their suffering. Every expression of gratitude from a patient was simultaneously a small comfort and a fresh wound, a reminder that she was accepting their thanks while participating in their destruction. This period of Maria's life represents the slow burn of psychological destruction, the gradual erosion of a noble spirit under the weight of accumulated moral compromise. Unlike the sudden shock of the Fishing Hamlet massacre, her time at the research hall was a prolonged torture that wore away at her sanity and self-worth with inexorable persistence. The very qualities that had made her an exceptional hunter, her empathy, her moral sensitivity, her deep sense of responsibility, now became instruments of her psychological destruction. The stage was being set for Maria's final desperate act. The guilt from the Fishing Hamlet, compounded by her ongoing complicity in the research hall's atrocities, was building toward a breaking point that would ultimately drive her to the most extreme solution she could conceive, ending her own life in a final attempt to prevent further harm from being done. Chapter 6. The Research Hall. The research hall represents one of the most morally complex and psychologically disturbing locations in Bloodborne's narrative, serving as both a center of scientific advancement and a monument to institutional cruelty. For Maria, this facility became the setting for her final attempt at redemption, a place where she hoped to find some measure of peace through caring for those who suffered in the name of progress. Instead, it became another source of torment that would push her ever closer to her ultimate breaking point. The research hall was established by the Healing Church as a secretive facility dedicated to one of their most ambitious and dangerous research programs: the creation of beings capable of communicating directly with the Great Ones. This research built upon the knowledge gained from expeditions like the one to the Fishing Hamlet, applying the insights gathered from studying cosmic entities to the systematic transformation of human subjects. The facility itself was a marvel of church architecture and engineering, built as a towering spiral structure that reflected the cosmic principles the researchers were attempting to understand. At its center stood a massive rotating staircase mechanism that could be adjusted to provide access to different levels of the facility, symbolically representing the ascension that the experiments were meant to facilitate. The very design of the building embodied the church's belief that through proper manipulation and study, humanity could be elevated to commune with forces beyond normal comprehension. The patients housed within the research hall were, officially, volunteers who had come forward to participate in the church's transcendence experiments. These individuals were motivated by various factors. Some sought to achieve personal enlightenment, others hoped to gain cosmic insights that might benefit humanity, and still others were driven by religious fervor or the promise of rewards from the church. Unlike the unwilling victims of the Fishing Hamlet, these subjects had ostensibly consented to their treatment. However, the reality of informed consent in the research hall was highly questionable. The patients were not fully informed about the nature of the experiments they would undergo, the likelihood of success, or the horrific transformations they would experience. Many came from desperate circumstances, driven to volunteer by poverty, illness, or other forms of suffering that made the church's promises seem attractive, regardless of the risks involved. The experiments themselves were brutal beyond description. The primary procedure involved the injection of mysterious fluids into the patients' craniums, causing their heads to expand grotesquely as their brains were flooded with substances meant to enhance their consciousness and sensory capabilities. The goal was to create individuals who could hear the sea, perceiving cosmic truths that were normally beyond human comprehension. The process was excruciatingly painful and frequently fatal. Those who survived the initial procedures found themselves transformed into barely recognizable parodies of their former selves. Their bodies became elongated and twisted, their heads swelled to enormous proportions, and their minds were often shattered by the influx of cosmic awareness they were forced to experience. Many lost the ability to communicate coherently, reduced to repetitive phrases or wordless screams of anguish. Maria's role in this nightmare was both protector and facilitator. Officially, she served as a caretaker and overseer, responsible for ensuring that the patients received whatever comfort could be provided while the experiments were conducted. Her noble bearing and genuine compassion made her well suited for this role, at least from the Church's perspective. The patients responded to her with trust and affection, seeing her as a maternal figure who offered islands of kindness in an ocean of suffering. The patients' devotion to Maria was both genuine and heartbreaking. They called out to her for comfort when the pain became unbearable, expressed gratitude for small acts of kindness, and looked to her as their primary source of hope in an increasingly hopeless situation. Some patients, like St. Adeline, developed particularly strong attachments to Maria, viewing her not just as a caretaker, but as a saint-like figure whose very presence provided spiritual sustenance. Maria's genuine efforts to provide comfort within the constraints of her position included small but meaningful gestures. She gave Adeline a key to a balcony where the patient could experience fresh air and the scent of flowers from the lumenflower gardens. She spoke gently to patients who were experiencing distress, offered what physical comfort she could, and tried to maintain some sense of dignity and humanity within the clinical environment of the research hall. However, these acts of kindness existed within a framework of institutional cruelty that Maria was ultimately serving rather than opposing. Her presence in the research hall legitimized the experiments by providing a veneer of care and compassion that helped maintain the fiction that the Church's research was conducted with proper concern for the subject's well-being. Her very compassion was being exploited to facilitate greater cruelties. The psychological toll on Maria was immense. Every day, she witnessed the degradation and suffering of individuals who trusted her, knowing that her institutional role made her complicit in their torment. The patient's gratitude and affection, rather than providing comfort, served as constant reminders of her moral compromises. She was accepting their thanks while participating in a system that was destroying them. The failure rate of the experiments was extraordinarily high. Most patients died during or shortly after the procedures, their bodies unable to withstand the trauma of the transformations being imposed upon them. Those who survived were often left in states of constant agony, their expanded consciousness bringing not enlightenment, but unbearable awareness of cosmic horrors. The few who achieved something resembling the desired communication with otherworldly forces were so fundamentally changed that they could barely be considered human anymore. Maria found herself in the impossible position of providing end-of-life care to patients who were being slowly killed by the very institution she served. She offered what comfort she could to the dying, tried to ease the suffering of those who survived, but were transformed beyond recognition, and attempted to maintain some thread of human connection with subjects whose minds had been shattered by cosmic exposure. The research hall's ultimate success came with the creation of the celestial emissary, a being that had successfully achieved communication with the Great Ones, but at the cost of any recognizable humanity. This achievement represented the culmination of all the suffering that had preceded it, proof that the Church's methods could work, but at a price that rendered the victory hollow and horrific. For Maria, witnessing the creation of the celestial emissary must have been simultaneously validating and devastating. It proved that the patient's suffering had not been entirely meaningless, that the research could achieve its stated goals. Yet it also demonstrated that success in this context meant the complete obliteration of human identity, the transformation of conscious beings into alien entities that bore no resemblance to their former selves. The weight of complicity in the research hall's operations added another layer to Maria's already overwhelming guilt. Where the Fishing Hamlet had been a sudden shock of violence and atrocity, the research hall was a prolonged exposure to institutionalized cruelty that wore away at her sanity through constant daily confrontation with suffering she could not prevent. The patient's trust and affection made her complicity even more painful, as she was forced to accept gratitude from individuals whose destruction she was facilitating. The lumenflower gardens that Maria maintained within the research hall serve as a poignant symbol of her attempts to preserve beauty and life within an environment dedicated to experimentation and death. These flowers, which appear throughout areas associated with cosmic knowledge and transcendence, represented Maria's desire to provide something pure and beautiful for the patients to experience. The gardens were her small rebellion against the sterile cruelty of the research environment, islands of natural beauty in a manufactured hell. Yet even these gardens carried tragic undertones. The lumenflowers themselves were associated with cosmic knowledge and the kind of transcendence the research hall sought to achieve through its brutal experiments. Maria's cultivation of these flowers represented her ongoing entanglement with the very forces that were destroying the patients she sought to protect. Even her acts of kindness were shadowed by the cosmic horror that permeated every aspect of the facility. The patients' various states of transformation and decay served as constant reminders of the ultimate futility of Maria's protective efforts. Some, like Adeline, retained enough coherence to engage in conversation and express gratitude for Maria's care. Others had been reduced to barely conscious beings, whose enlarged heads contained minds shattered by cosmic exposure. Still others had died during the experiments, their bodies disposed of in the acidic pools that lined the base of the research hall's rotating staircase. Maria's daily routine in the research hall involved moving between these different categories of patients, providing what care she could, while knowing that she was powerless to prevent their ongoing suffering or death. The facility's design, with its multiple levels and rotating staircase, meant that she was constantly confronted with the full spectrum of the research's effects, from newly arrived volunteers to those in the final stages of transformation or decay. The other staff members of the research hall viewed Maria with a mixture of respect and incomprehension. Her noble bearing and genuine compassion set her apart from the clinical detachment that characterized most of the facility's personnel. Some may have seen her emotional investment in the patients as a weakness or liability, while others may have envied her ability to maintain some semblance of humanity within the institutional framework. As time passed, Maria's psychological state continued to deteriorate under the constant pressure of her impossible position. The combination of guilt from the Fishing Hamlet and ongoing complicity in the research hall's cruelties created a psychological burden that no individual could reasonably be expected to bear. Her noble intentions had led her into situations where every choice involved some form of moral compromise, where attempting to do good required participating in systems that caused immense harm. The patient's continued devotion to Maria, rather than providing comfort, became another source of torment. Their trust highlighted the gap between who she wanted to be and who she actually was within the institutional framework. Their gratitude served as a constant reminder that she was accepting thanks for kindnesses that were fundamentally inadequate responses to the suffering she was helping to facilitate. The research hall thus represents the final stage of Maria's psychological breakdown, the place where her last attempts at redemption were corrupted and twisted into new forms of complicity. The facility served as a pressure cooker that concentrated and intensified all of her accumulated guilt and moral conflict, pushing her ever closer to the breaking point that would ultimately drive her to take her own life. Chapter 7. The Final Descent. The culmination of Maria's psychological torment came with a decision that would define her legacy and transform her from a tragic figure in life to an eternal guardian in death. Unable to bear the weight of her accumulated guilt and the impossibility of finding true redemption within the systems she served, Maria made the ultimate sacrifice in a desperate attempt to prevent further harm from being done. Her suicide represents not just a personal tragedy, but a profound indictment of the institutions that had corrupted her noble intentions. The decision to end her own life was not made lightly or impulsively. Maria's psychology throughout her decline suggests someone who had exhausted every possibility for finding meaning or redemption within the constraints of her situation. She had tried to find purpose through protecting the research hall patients, but found herself complicit in their suffering. She had attempted to provide comfort and dignity within an inherently undignified system, but realized that her very presence was being used to legitimize cruelties she could not prevent. The method of Maria's suicide carries symbolic weight that speaks to the depth of her despair. According to the law, she ended her life by cutting her own throat, a method that was both decisive and symbolically significant. The throat, as the source of voice and breath, represents communication and life itself. By destroying her own throat, Maria was silencing herself permanently, ending not just her physical existence, but her ability to speak about the horrors she had witnessed and participated in. The location of her suicide was equally significant. The Astral Clocktower, positioned at the very top of the Research Hall complex. This tower, with its massive clock face and astronomical significance, represented the pinnacle of the Church's attempts to understand cosmic forces and achieve transcendence. By choosing to die in this location, Maria was making a statement about the ultimate futility of these pursuits and the price they exacted from those who participated in them. The timing of Maria's death in relation to the broader timeline of Bloodborne's events is somewhat ambiguous, but it appears to have occurred during or shortly after her time overseeing the Research Hall. The blood that pools around her chair when the player encounters her in the Hunter's Nightmare suggests that her wounds were still fresh when she was drawn into the Nightmare realm, indicating that her death and her arrival in the Nightmare were closely connected events. Maria's suicide was not just an escape from unbearable psychological pain, but also a desperate attempt to prevent further harm. By positioning herself as guardian of the Astral Clocktower and the path to the Fishing Hamlet beyond, she sought to ensure that no one else would be able to access the site of the original atrocity. Her death became a form of eternal vigilance, a sacrifice that transformed her into a barrier preventing others from repeating the mistakes that had destroyed her. The transformation of Maria from living person to nightmare guardian involved more than just death. It required her conscious choice to remain in the Hunter's Nightmare rather than moving on to whatever afterlife might await. This decision represents the ultimate expression of her noble character, as she chose eternal suffering and isolation over the possibility of peace if it meant protecting others from the horrors she had experienced. The Hunter's Nightmare itself appears to have been created, at least in part, as a response to the atrocities committed at the Fishing Hamlet. The cosmic entity Kos, even in death, possessed sufficient power to curse those who had violated her and her people. This curse trapped blood-drunk hunters in an eternal nightmare where they would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions while being unable to escape or find peace. Maria's presence in the Hunter's Nightmare is both punishment and self-imposed penance. She is trapped there not just because of her participation in the Fishing Hamlet massacre, but because she chose to remain as a guardian. Her eternal vigil in the Astral Clocktower represents her final attempt to take responsibility for her actions and prevent others from making similar mistakes. The physical state in which the player encounters Maria in the nightmare is deeply symbolic. She sits in an ornate chair with blood still flowing from her throat and wrists, appearing as a corpse until the player's approach awakens her. This presentation emphasizes both the violence of her death and the fact that she exists in a liminal state between life and death, neither fully alive nor completely at rest. Maria's famous line upon awakening, "A corpse should be left well alone," carries multiple layers of meaning. On the surface, she appears to be referring to herself, warning the player not to disturb her rest. However, the line also refers to Kos, whose corpse should have been left undisturbed on the beach of the Fishing Hamlet. The ambiguity of the reference reflects Maria's identification with both the victim and perpetrator aspects of the tragedy that defined her existence. The fact that Maria retains her full consciousness and fighting abilities in the nightmare suggests that her transformation was different from that experienced by other hunters trapped in the realm. Where most nightmare inhabitants are reduced to mindless repetition of their violent obsessions, Maria maintains her noble bearing and moral awareness. This preservation of self may be connected to her role as guardian, requiring her to remain coherent and capable to fulfill her protective function. Maria's eternal existence in the hunter's nightmare represents the ultimate tragic irony of her story. The noble hunter who had sought to escape the corruption of Cainhurst and find pure purpose in the hunt found herself trapped forever in a realm dedicated to showcasing the hunt's ultimate corruption. Her desire to protect others led to her eternal isolation. Her attempt to prevent further atrocities resulted in her becoming a final obstacle that must be overcome to reach the very site she sought to protect. The psychological complexity of Maria's situation in the nightmare cannot be overstated. She exists in a state of perpetual awareness of her failures and compromises, forced to relive her guilt while simultaneously trying to prevent others from accessing the source of that guilt. Her noble intentions remain intact, but they are now expressed through violence against those who would follow the same path she once took. This sets the stage for the final confrontation between Maria and the player character, a battle that represents not just a test of combat skill, but a tragic collision between two individuals seeking to fulfill what they perceive as noble purposes. Maria fights to protect secrets that should remain hidden. The player fights to uncover truths that might provide understanding or closure. Both are, in their own way, trying to do what they believe is right, making their conflict all the more poignant. Chapter 8. The Guardian's Stand. The encounter between the player and Lady Maria represents one of the most emotionally complex and narratively rich boss battles in Bloodborne, serving not merely as a test of combat prowess, but as the tragic culmination of Maria's story and a profound meditation on guilt, sacrifice, and the corrupting nature of noble intentions. This confrontation takes place in the Astral Clocktower, the very location where Maria ended her own life, now transformed into an arena where she must make a final stand against those who would uncover the secrets she died trying to protect. The setting of this battle is laden with symbolic significance. The Astral Clocktower, with its massive clock face and astronomical instruments, represents humanity's attempts to understand and measure cosmic forces that exist beyond normal comprehension. The tower's position atop the research hall emphasizes its role as the pinnacle of the church's transcendental ambitions, while its function as the gateway to the Fishing Hamlet makes it the literal and metaphorical barrier between the present and the site of the original sin. Maria's position in this space is equally symbolic. She sits in an ornate chair that resembles a throne, positioned as both queen and prisoner of this liminal realm between the research hall and the Fishing Hamlet. The blood that continuously flows from her self-inflicted wounds serves as a constant reminder of the violence that brought her to this state, while her regal bearing maintains the dignity that characterized her throughout her life. The player's approach to Maria triggers her awakening, transforming what appears to be a corpse into a formidable opponent. This resurrection is not a return to life, but rather an activation of her guardian function, demonstrating that even in death, Maria's sense of duty compels her to action. Her famous warning, "A corpse should be left well alone," serves as both a personal plea and a broader philosophical statement about the dangers of disturbing things that should remain hidden. The battle itself unfolds in 3 distinct phases, each representing a different aspect of Maria's character and the progressive abandonment of her moral constraints. In the first phase, Maria fights with her traditional style, using the Rakuyo, or a nightmare version of it, in its various forms along with her Evelyn pistol. This phase represents Maria as she was during her time as Gehrman's student, skilled, elegant, and deadly, but fighting within the bounds of conventional hunter techniques. Maria's combat style during this initial phase showcases the training she received under Gehrman and the aristocratic grace that marked her noble heritage. Her movements are fluid and precise, demonstrating the years of practice that allowed her to master the demanding Rakuyo. She flows seamlessly between the weapon's single and dual blade configurations, using feints, dodges, and perfectly timed strikes to overwhelm her opponent, while maintaining the dignity and composure that characterized her living persona. However, as the battle progresses and Maria's health diminishes, she is forced to make the same desperate choice that she made during her final moments of life, the embrace of the blood magic she had spent years rejecting. The transition to the second phase is marked by one of the most dramatically powerful moments in Bloodborne, as Maria plunges her blades deep into her own chest, unlocking the blood magic that flows through her Cainhurst heritage. This self-inflicted wound represents far more than just a combat enhancement. It symbolizes Maria's abandonment of her core principles in service of what she perceives as a greater good. The blood that flows from this wound enhances her weapons and extends her reach, granting her new attacks that would have been impossible using conventional techniques. Yet this power comes at the cost of everything she once stood for, forcing her to embrace the very corruption she had rejected when leaving Cainhurst. The psychological implications of this transformation are staggering. Maria, who had defined herself in opposition to blood magic, who had chosen skill over supernatural shortcuts, who had maintained her moral purity through countless compromises, now finds herself using the power she despised most in a desperate attempt to fulfill her protective duty. The tragic irony is that this abandonment of her principles is motivated by the same noble intentions that had guided her throughout her life. The second phase of the battle showcases Maria enhanced by blood magic, her attacks now trailing crimson energy and her reach extended by supernatural force. Her fighting style becomes more aggressive and desperate, reflecting her internal conflict over using abilities she had spent her life rejecting. The blood that enhances her weapons serves as a visual reminder of both her Cainhurst heritage and the violence that permeates her existence. Yet even this desperate measure proves insufficient as the battle continues. The transition to the third and final phase sees Maria make an even more extreme sacrifice, as she somehow ignites her blood magic with fire, creating attacks that combine both blood and flame damage. This combination is unprecedented in Bloodborne's lore, suggesting that Maria has pushed her abilities beyond normal limits in her desperation to fulfill her guardian role. The fire element that appears in Maria's final phase raises intriguing questions about the nature of her transformation and the source of these abilities. Fire in Bloodborne is typically associated with the old hunters and their conflicts with the beasts of old Gehrman, but Maria's fire seems different, more personal and desperate. Some speculations suggest that this fire might represent the burning guilt and passion that have consumed her, manifested as literal flame through the interaction with her blood magic. During this final phase, Maria's fighting style becomes almost frenzied, her attacks incorporating sweeping flames that can catch opponents even at medium range. Her movements retain their grace, but are now tinged with desperation and fury, reflecting the internal tornado of emotions that have driven her to this extreme state. She has abandoned not just her principles, but her very identity, transforming herself into something alien to everything she once was. The combat mechanics of Maria's fight are designed to reflect her character development and the themes of her story. Players who attempt to maintain distance and fight defensively will find themselves punished by her increasing reach and aggressive pursuit. The battle rewards aggressive, close-quarters combat, forcing players to engage with Maria on terms that mirror the intimate, personal nature of her tragedy. The difficulty progression of the fight also serves narrative purposes. The first phase, while challenging, feels familiar and manageable, reflecting the Maria who existed within conventional hunter frameworks. The second phase's blood enhancement significantly increases the challenge, representing the moral compromises that made her situation more complex and dangerous. The final phase, with its combination of blood and fire, presents the greatest challenge, reflecting the ultimate extremes to which Maria has been driven. Throughout all three phases, Maria retains certain characteristics that mark her as distinct from other nightmare inhabitants. Her attacks, while deadly, are never cruel or sadistic. She fights with the measured precision of a skilled warrior rather than the mindless fury of a blood-drunk hunter. Even in her most desperate moments, she maintains a dignity that speaks to the noble spirit that still exists within her transformed state. The arena itself participates in the battle's symbolism. The clock tower setting, with its precise mechanisms and astronomical focus, represents the human attempt to impose order and understanding on cosmic forces. Maria's presence here, blocking access to the chaotic truth of the Fishing Hamlet, embodies the tension between order and revelation, between protection and the pursuit of knowledge. The battle's conclusion, regardless of whether the player emerges victorious, represents a tragedy for all involved. If Maria succeeds in defeating the player, she has preserved her secret but failed to find the peace that death should have brought her. If the player defeats Maria, they have overcome a noble guardian who was acting according to her conscience, making their victory hollow despite its necessity for progressing the narrative. The aftermath of Maria's defeat reveals the depths of her sacrifice. Her final words and actions demonstrate that even in this extremity, her primary concern remains the protection of others rather than her own fate. She recognizes the inevitability of the player's progress toward the Fishing Hamlet, while hoping against hope that somehow the cycle of violence and revelation might be broken. Maria's boss battle thus serves as both climax and tragedy, showcasing the complete arc of her character while forcing players to confront the moral complexity of their own actions. It demonstrates how noble intentions can lead to desperate measures, how the pursuit of protection can require violence, and how even the most well-intentioned guardians can become obstacles to truth and understanding. Chapter 9. The Doll's Reflection. The connection between Lady Maria and the Plain Doll represents one of Bloodborne's most psychologically complex and emotionally resonant subplots, exploring themes of unrequited love, loss, and the ways in which grief can distort memory and perception. This relationship, or rather the absence of one, illuminates both the depth of Gehrman's feelings for his former student and the tragic inadequacy of his attempt to recreate what he had lost through artificial means. To understand the significance of the doll, we must first examine the relationship between Maria and Gehrman during her lifetime. While Maria admired and respected her mentor greatly, viewing him as the embodiment of everything noble about the hunt, there is no evidence that she reciprocated the deeper feelings he harbored for her. Her respect remained within appropriate bounds of a student's gratitude toward a teacher, never developing into the romantic attachment that Gehrman secretly desired. Gehrman's feelings for Maria went far beyond professional admiration or even friendship. The lore describes his emotions as a curious mania, suggesting an obsession that he himself may not have fully understood or acknowledged. This unrequited love was further complicated by their mentor-student relationship and the significant responsibilities they both carried as leaders within the Hunter organization. Gehrman's position required him to maintain professional boundaries that prevented him from expressing his true feelings. The asymmetry of their relationship created a painful dynamic for Gehrman, who was forced to watch the woman he loved from a distance while maintaining the facade of purely professional interaction. His training of Maria, while genuine in its intent to develop her abilities, also served as a way to spend time with her and to shape her development according to his ideals. The pride he took in her achievements was colored by personal feelings that he could never openly acknowledge. Maria's departure from active hunting following the Fishing Hamlet expedition would have been devastating for Gehrman on multiple levels. Not only was he losing his most promising student and one of the organization's most effective hunters, but he was also losing the person who had become the focus of his emotional life. Her visible distress and psychological deterioration would have been particularly painful for someone who cared deeply about her well-being, but was powerless to provide the help she needed. When Maria ultimately took her own life, Gehrman's grief was compounded by the realization that he would never have the opportunity to express his true feelings, or to provide the support she had needed during her darkest moments. The finality of death, combined with the weight of unspoken emotions, created a psychological crisis that would drive him to desperate measures in his attempt to cope with the loss. The creation of the plain doll represents Gehrman's attempt to fill the void left by Maria's death through artificial recreation of her presence. Using his considerable skills as a craftsman and weaponsmith, he created a doll that perfectly replicated Maria's physical appearance, down to the smallest details of her face, hair, and proportions. The craftsmanship involved in this creation speaks to both Gehrman's technical abilities and the intensity of his feelings for the woman he was attempting to recreate. However, the doll's creation was not merely an exercise in craftsmanship, but also involved supernatural elements that transformed it from mere sculpture into something approaching life. The intervention of the moon presence, the great one that would later trap Gehrman in the hunter's dream, gave the doll a form of consciousness and the ability to move and speak. This transformation occurred as part of the larger bargain that bound Gehrman to eternal service in the dream. The moon presence's motivations for animating the doll remain somewhat mysterious, but the act serves multiple purposes within the broader narrative. By giving Gehrman a companion who resembled Maria, the Great One provided both comfort and torment, ensuring that the first hunter would be reminded constantly of what he had lost, while never being able to truly reclaim it. This psychological manipulation helped to secure Gehrman's compliance with his role as guide and mentor to future hunters. When the doll first came to life, Gehrman may have experienced a brief moment of joy or relief, believing that he had successfully recreated the presence that had been taken from him. However, this initial satisfaction quickly gave way to disappointment and frustration as the fundamental differences between the doll and Maria became apparent. While the doll possessed Maria's appearance and voice, she lacked entirely the personality, spirit, and individual characteristics that had made Maria herself. The doll's personality, as experienced by players, is gentle, supportive, and somewhat ethereal, but it lacks the fire, determination, and complex emotional depth that characterized Maria during her lifetime. Where Maria was passionate about the hunt's noble purposes, the doll is merely helpful. Where Maria showed fierce independence and moral conviction, the doll displays pleasant compliance. Where Maria possessed the complex psychology of someone struggling with moral compromise and guilt, the doll exhibits a simple desire to be useful and supportive. This disparity between expectation and reality created a fresh source of pain for Gehrman. The doll's presence served as a constant reminder of what he had lost, rather than a meaningful replacement for it. Her physical resemblance to Maria made the absence of Maria's essential characteristics all the more apparent and painful. The doll was simultaneously too much like Maria to ignore and too different from her to provide comfort. Gehrman's relationship with the doll became characterized by a complex mixture of appreciation, frustration, and melancholy. He could not bring himself to destroy or abandon his creation, as it represented his only tangible connection to Maria's memory. Yet neither could he find genuine satisfaction in the doll's company, as every interaction emphasized the inadequacy of his artificial recreation. The doll's gentle attempts to provide comfort and support served mainly to highlight the absence of the authentic relationship he had desired. The psychological implications of this situation are profound. Gehrman found himself trapped not only by the moon presence's bargain, but also by his own creation, forced to live eternally alongside a reminder of his greatest loss and his inability to truly recreate what he had valued most. The doll's presence made it impossible for him to forget Maria or to move beyond his grief, ensuring that his pain would remain fresh and immediate throughout his eternal service. For the doll herself, the situation presents its own tragic elements. She exists as a conscious being with her own desires and motivations, yet her entire purpose and identity are defined by her resemblance to someone else. Her interactions with players suggest a genuine desire to be helpful and to form meaningful connections, but she is forever constrained by her role as a substitute for someone she can never truly replace. The doll seems to possess some awareness of her connection to Maria, though the exact extent of this knowledge remains ambiguous. Her dialogue after Maria's defeat in the DLC suggests that she feels a sense of relief, as if some burden has been lifted from her shoulders. This moment hints at a deeper connection between the two figures than mere physical resemblance, suggesting that the doll may carry some echo of Maria's pain and guilt along with her appearance. The parallel between Maria and the doll extends to their roles as nurturing figures. Just as Maria served as a caretaker for the research hall patients, the doll serves as a guide and supporter for hunters in the dream. Both provide comfort and assistance to those who are suffering, and both do so with genuine compassion despite the constraints of their situations. This similarity suggests that Gehrman's creation may have captured more of Maria's essential nature than initially apparent. However, the crucial difference lies in the voluntary nature of their service. Maria chose to take on the role of caretaker as part of her attempt at redemption, while the doll was created specifically to fulfill a supportive function. Maria's actions were driven by complex motivations, including guilt, duty, and genuine care for others. The doll's actions appear to flow from a simpler desire to be useful and helpful, lacking the psychological complexity that made Maria's choices so poignant. The relationship between Maria and the doll also illuminates broader themes about memory, loss, and the human tendency to idealize those who are no longer present. Gehrman's creation of the doll represents an attempt to preserve his memory of Maria, but in doing so, he may have simplified and idealized her, focusing on her gentle and supportive qualities while losing sight of the passionate and morally complex individual she actually was. This process of idealization through recreation speaks to universal human experiences of grief and loss. The temptation to remember the dead as they appeared in their best moments, to focus on their positive qualities while forgetting their struggles and complexities, is a natural part of the mourning process. However, Gehrman's ability to literally recreate Maria's physical form through the doll makes this idealization literal and permanent, trapping him in a relationship with his own simplified memory, rather than allowing him to process and move beyond his grief. The doll's existence also raises questions about identity, consciousness, and what makes an individual unique. While she possesses Maria's appearance and some of her mannerisms, she lacks the experiences, relationships, and psychological development that shaped Maria's personality. This suggests that individual identity consists of far more than physical appearance, or even basic personality traits, encompassing the full range of experiences and choices that create a unique consciousness. The tragic irony of Gehrman's situation is that his creation of the doll, intended to provide comfort and preserve Maria's memory, actually serves to emphasize everything he has lost. The doll's gentle presence makes Maria's passionate intensity seem even more absent by comparison. Her simple desire to be helpful highlights the complex moral struggles that characterize Maria's later life. Her artificial nature emphasizes the authentic humanity that made Maria irreplaceable. Chapter 10. Echoes in the Nightmare. The broader implications of Lady Maria's story echo throughout the Hunter's Nightmare and the larger narrative of Bloodborne, creating ripple effects that influence other characters, shape the nature of the nightmare itself, and provide commentary on the cyclical nature of violence and guilt. Maria's presence in the nightmare serves not just as a personal tragedy, but as a focal point for examining how individual choices and moral compromises contribute to larger systemic failures and perpetual cycles of harm. The Hunter's Nightmare itself appears to have been created, at least in part, as a direct response to the atrocities committed at the Fishing Hamlet. The curse that Kos placed upon the hunters who violated her and her people created a realm where those responsible for blood-drunk violence would be trapped for eternity, forced to confront the consequences of their actions while being unable to escape or find peace. This cosmic justice system demonstrates that even the Great Ones, alien as they may be, possess some concept of moral accountability and retribution. Within this framework, Maria's position is unique and complex. Unlike other hunters trapped in the nightmare, who seem to be condemned for their blood-drunk violence, Maria appears to have chosen her role as guardian of the Astral Clocktower. Her presence there is both punishment and self-imposed penance, representing her attempt to take responsibility for her actions and prevent others from making similar mistakes. This voluntary acceptance of eternal duty distinguishes her from the other nightmare inhabitants and speaks to the nobility that persisted within her even after her moral compromises. The structure of the hunter's nightmare reflects the chronology of the hunting organization's moral decline. The first area, resembling a twisted version of Gehrman's streets, showcases hunters who have become blood-drunk and lost their humanity through excessive violence. The research hall represents the institutional corruption that transformed noble pursuits of knowledge into systematic cruelty. The Fishing Hamlet stands as the original sin that set all subsequent corruption in motion. Maria's position at the boundary between the research hall and the Fishing Hamlet makes her a literal gatekeeper between present corruption and original sin. Her role prevents most travelers from reaching the site of the first atrocity, while simultaneously serving as a final test of worthiness for those determined to confront the truth. This positioning emphasizes her function as both protector and final obstacle, someone who has taken upon herself the responsibility of deciding who should be allowed to witness the full extent of the hunter's sins. The patients in the research hall continue to call out for Maria even in the nightmare, demonstrating the lasting impact of her genuine care and compassion despite the compromised context in which it was offered. Their continued devotion speaks to the authenticity of her attempts to provide comfort within an inherently uncomforting system. Yet, their presence in the nightmare also serves as a reminder that good intentions are insufficient to prevent harm when operating within fundamentally corrupt institutional frameworks. The relationship between Maria and other significant figures in the nightmare further illuminates the themes of her story. Ludwig, the Holy Blade, represents another hunter whose noble intentions led to tragic consequences, though his path differed from Maria's in significant ways. Where Maria maintained her moral awareness throughout her decline, Ludwig appears to have lost himself entirely in his obsession with his guiding moonlight, becoming a beast in both body and mind while retaining delusions of righteousness. The contrast between Maria and Ludwig highlights different ways that moral individuals can be corrupted by the systems they serve. Ludwig's transformation into the cleric beast represents the complete loss of human identity in service of an ideal that may have been illusory from the beginning. Maria's retention of her essential self, even in death, suggests a different kind of strength, the ability to maintain moral awareness even while being forced into compromising situations. The presence of other hunters throughout the nightmare creates a community of the damned, individuals who were all, in various ways, corrupted by their participation in the hunt's increasingly questionable activities. Yet Maria stands apart from this community, isolated in her clock tower by her unique combination of guilt and protective duty. Her solitude emphasizes the personal nature of her redemption quest and the weight of the responsibility she has assumed. The Fishing Hamlet itself, as the ultimate destination beyond Maria's guardianship, represents the unavoidable confrontation with historical truth that Maria seeks to prevent. The village, with its transformed inhabitants and the corpse of Kos on its beach, stands as a monument to the consequences of unchecked academic ambition and the pursuit of knowledge without ethical constraints. The priest who continuously utters curses against the hunters demonstrates that the harm done there continues to reverberate, creating ongoing consequences that extend far beyond the immediate victims. The Orphan of Kos, as the final boss of the DLC, represents both the culmination of the hunter's sins and the possibility of redemption through accepting responsibility for past actions. Defeating the orphan doesn't undo the harm that was done, but it does allow the tortured spirit to find peace and breaks the curse that has trapped the hunters in their nightmare. This resolution suggests that confronting and accepting responsibility for past wrongs, rather than trying to hide or forget them, is the only path to genuine redemption. Maria's role in preventing access to this resolution creates a tragic irony. Her protective instincts and desire to prevent further harm actually serve to perpetuate the cycle of guilt and punishment that the nightmare represents. By preventing others from reaching the orphan and potentially finding redemption, she ensures that the curse continues to operate and that the victims of the original atrocity remain unable to find peace. This irony extends to the nature of secrets and truth within Bloodborne's narrative. Maria's famous line about corpses being left well alone represents a philosophy that harmful truths should remain hidden to prevent further damage. Yet the game's overall narrative suggests that confronting difficult truths, however painful, is necessary for genuine progress and healing. Maria's well-intentioned secrecy becomes another form of harm, preventing the resolution that might benefit both the guilty and the innocent. The cyclical nature of the nightmare and its relationship to the broader Bloodborne narrative demonstrates how individual moral compromises contribute to larger systemic failures. Maria's participation in the Fishing Hamlet massacre was enabled by institutional structures that prioritized knowledge over ethics, personal loyalty over moral principle, and professional duty over individual conscience. Her later attempts at redemption were undermined by similar structural problems that made genuine reform impossible within existing frameworks. The research hall, where Maria spent her final living years, exemplifies these structural problems. The facility was designed to create the appearance of ethical research while actually facilitating systematic abuse of vulnerable subjects. Maria's role as caretaker provided a veneer of compassion that helped legitimize the underlying cruelty, demonstrating how good individuals can be co-opted to serve harmful systems even when their intentions remain pure. The broader Hunter organization, as depicted throughout Bloodborne, shows similar patterns of structural corruption that make individual moral action increasingly difficult. The Church's manipulation of the Hunters, the pursuit of cosmic knowledge without ethical constraints, and the gradual transformation of protective duty into systematic violence all reflect institutional failures that create impossible choices for individuals trying to maintain their moral integrity. Maria's story thus serves as both a personal tragedy and a critique of the systems that created the conditions for that tragedy. Her noble intentions and genuine efforts to do good were consistently undermined by institutional frameworks that made meaningful reform impossible while co-opting her efforts to legitimize continued harm. Her ultimate sacrifice, while admirable in its intent, becomes another example of how individual solutions are inadequate responses to systemic problems. The lasting impact of Maria's choices continues to influence events long after her death. Gehrman's creation of the doll represents an attempt to preserve her memory that actually distorts it, creating an idealized version that lacks the complexity and moral struggle that defined the real Maria. The doll's presence in the hunter's dream serves as a constant reminder of loss while failing to provide genuine comfort or resolution for Gehrman's grief. The influence of Maria's story extends beyond the immediate circle of those who knew her personally. Her weapons, fighting style, and philosophical approach to hunting became part of the broader hunter tradition, influencing subsequent generations even as the context of her struggles was forgotten or deliberately obscured. The techniques she developed under Gehrman's tutelage continued to be taught and practiced, carrying forward her legacy in ways that divorced her methods from the moral complexities that shaped their development. The research hall itself, even in its nightmare form, continues to reflect Maria's influence through the patients who still call out for her care and protection. Their continued devotion demonstrates that genuine compassion, even within compromised circumstances, creates lasting bonds that transcend death and transformation. Yet their presence in the nightmare also serves as evidence that good intentions are insufficient to prevent harm when operating within fundamentally corrupt systems. The secrets that Maria died trying to protect have themselves become sources of ongoing harm. The concealment of the Fishing Hamlet atrocities prevented the broader hunter community from learning from these mistakes, ensuring that similar moral compromises would be repeated in different contexts. The institutional cultures that enabled the original massacre persisted and evolved, creating new opportunities for the exploitation of noble intentions in service of questionable ends. Chapter 11. The Rakuyo's Journey. The story of Maria's beloved weapon, the Rakuyo, provides another lens through which to examine her character arc and the broader themes of her narrative. This elegant trick weapon, crafted in the workshops of Cainhurst, represents not just a tool of combat, but a physical manifestation of Maria's values, her rejection of supernatural shortcuts, and ultimately, her complete psychological breakdown when she could no longer bear to wield it. The Rakuyo's design philosophy perfectly embodied Maria's approach to both combat and life. Unlike the blood-enhanced weapons favoured by other Cainhurst nobles, the Rakuyo relied entirely on the wielder's skill, dexterity, and years of dedicated practice. Its dual-blade configuration, when transformed, demanded perfect timing and spatial awareness, while its single-blade form required precision and technique that could only be developed through countless hours of training. This weapon could not be enhanced through supernatural means or shortcuts. It responded only to genuine mastery earned through dedication and discipline. The weapon's name, meaning fallen leaves in Japanese, carries deep poetic weight when considered alongside Maria's ultimate fate. What had once been her source of confidence and identity became, after the Fishing Hamlet massacre, a reminder of all the ways she had compromised her principles. The skills that had made her legendary among hunters had been perverted to serve genocidal ends, transforming her greatest strength into a source of unbearable guilt. Maria's decision to throw the Rakuyo down a well represents one of the most symbolically powerful moments in her decline. This was not merely the disposal of a weapon, but the rejection of her entire identity as a hunter. The well itself, a traditional symbol of depth and hidden knowledge, becomes a burial place for everything the weapon represented. Her years of training, her philosophical commitment to skill over supernatural power, her connection to Gehrman's teachings, and her sense of purpose as a protector of humanity. The act of disposal was also deeply personal, reflecting Maria's inability to separate the weapon from the memories of how it had been used. Every time she looked at the Rakuyo, she would have been reminded not just of her achievements and the pride she had once taken in her abilities, but of the specific moments when those abilities were turned against innocent people. The weapon had become contaminated by association with atrocity, making it impossible for her to continue wielding it without being confronted by her complicity in the massacre. Interestingly, when the player encounters the Rakuyo in the DLC, it is found in the Fishing Hamlet itself, retrieved from the well where Maria had discarded it. This discovery creates a poignant connection between the player's acquisition of the weapon and the site of the original trauma that led to its abandonment. To claim the Rakuyo, players must venture into the very location that Maria died, trying to keep hidden, facing the shark-like creatures that guard the well in a combat encounter that tests their worthiness to inherit her legacy. The Rakuyo's presence in the Fishing Hamlet also suggests that Maria's discarding of the weapon was not random but deliberate. She may have traveled to the site of her greatest shame to dispose of the instrument that had participated in the atrocity, creating a form of ritualistic burial that connected the weapon's disposal to the scene of its corruption. This interpretation adds another layer to Maria's psychological journey, suggesting that her relationship with the Fishing Hamlet was more complex than simple avoidance and guilt. The weapon's retrieval by the player character raises questions about inheritance, redemption, and the possibility of reclaiming corrupted tools for noble purposes. In the hands of a new wielder, the Rakuyo becomes divorced from its traumatic history with Maria, allowing it to return to its original purpose as an instrument of skill-based combat. This transformation suggests that objects themselves are not inherently corrupted by their history. Rather, their meaning and moral weight depend on how they are employed by their users. However, the player's use of the Rakuyo also creates an ironic commentary on the cyclical nature of violence and moral compromise within Bloodborne's world. The same weapon that Maria could no longer bear to wield because of its association with atrocity is now being used by another hunter who is, depending on the player's choices, potentially engaged in similar patterns of violence and moral ambiguity. The Rakuyo's journey from Maria's hands to the players reflects the broader cycle of hunters taking up arms for what they believe to be noble purposes, only to find themselves complicit in systems that corrupt their original intentions. The technical aspects of the Rakuyo's design also reflect Maria's character and fighting philosophy. The weapon's movesets emphasize fluid combination attacks, precise timing, and the ability to adapt quickly between different ranges and fighting styles. These characteristics mirror Maria's approach to moral and practical challenges throughout her life. She valued adaptability, precision, and the ability to respond elegantly to changing circumstances. Her combat style, like her character, emphasized grace under pressure and the pursuit of excellence through disciplined practice. The transformation mechanism that allows the Rakuyo to shift between single and dual blade configurations represents Maria's understanding of the need for versatility in both combat and life. Just as the weapon could adapt to different tactical situations, Maria herself had adapted to various roles and challenges throughout her career. However, this adaptability also became a source of weakness when it led her to compromise her principles in service of perceived necessities. The Rakuyo's requirement for high skill stats in the game mechanics reflects the historical Maria's commitment to excellence and her rejection of easy solutions. Players who wish to wield the weapon effectively must invest significantly in developing their character's capabilities, mirroring the years of training and dedication that Maria herself put into mastering the weapon. This mechanical requirement serves as a tribute to Maria's philosophy and a reminder that true mastery cannot be achieved through shortcuts or supernatural enhancement. The weapon's scaling properties and damage output reflect its philosophy of rewarding genuine investment and skill. Unlike weapons that rely heavily on elemental damage or special effects, the Rakuyo's effectiveness comes primarily from its base damage and scaling with the user's attributes. This design choice reinforces the weapon's thematic connection to Maria's values and provides players with a combat experience that echoes her approach to martial excellence. The moveset variety available with the Rakuyo allows players to experience something approximating Maria's own fighting style, with its emphasis on flowing combinations, precise strikes, and the seamless integration of single and dual-wielding techniques. The weapon's attacks feel both elegant and deadly, capturing the aristocratic grace that characterized Maria's approach to combat while maintaining the lethality necessary for survival in Bloodborne's hostile world. The Rakuyo's presence in both Maria's boss fight and as a weapon available to players creates an interesting parallel between the player character and the tragic hunter they must defeat. In the boss battle, players witness the ultimate expression of Maria's skills with her signature weapon, seeing firsthand the techniques and combinations that made her legendary. When they later acquire and use the weapon themselves, they are essentially learning to fight like Maria, inheriting not just her tool, but aspects of her combat philosophy and approach. This inheritance creates a complex relationship between the player and Maria's legacy. On one hand, mastering the Rakuyo represents a form of tribute to Maria's skills and dedication to martial excellence. On the other hand, using the weapon in the service of the hunt potentially continues the cycle of noble intentions being corrupted by systematic violence that define Maria's own tragic arc. The Rakuyo's journey from symbol of pride to source of shame to inherited legacy reflects the broader themes of Bloodborne regarding the cyclical nature of violence, the corruption of noble intentions, and the ways in which the past continues to influence the present. The weapon serves as a physical link between Maria's story and the player's experience, creating a tangible connection that extends her influence beyond her death and her role as a boss encounter. Chapter 12. The lumenflower gardens. Among the most poignant symbols associated with Lady Maria are the lumenflower gardens that she cultivated and maintained throughout her time at the research hall. These ethereal, light-emitting flowers represent Maria's desperate attempts to preserve beauty, dignity, and natural life within an environment dedicated to systematic dehumanization and scientific cruelty. The gardens serve as physical manifestations of her ongoing struggle to maintain her humanity while operating within increasingly inhuman institutional frameworks. Lumen flowers, as they appear throughout Bloodborne, are mysterious botanical specimens that seem to exist at the intersection between the natural and supernatural worlds. Their ability to emit light suggests a connection to cosmic forces or otherworldly energies, yet they maintain the essential characteristics of living plants. This dual nature makes them particularly appropriate symbols for Maria's own existence, as she straddled the boundary between human nobility and cosmic horror throughout her career. The cultivation of these gardens required significant effort and dedication on Maria's part. In an environment like the research hall, where every resource and moment of time was ostensibly dedicated to the advancement of the church's experimental programs, Maria's insistence on maintaining spaces of natural beauty represented a form of quiet rebellion. She was asserting the value of life and beauty for their own sake, independent of their utility to the institutional goals that dominated the facility. The presence of lumenflower gardens throughout the research hall served multiple functions for the patients housed there. On a practical level, the gardens provided visual beauty and natural fragrance that offered some relief from the sterile clinical atmosphere of the experimental facility. For individuals undergoing traumatic medical procedures and psychological stress, these small islands of natural beauty may have provided crucial psychological anchoring points that helped maintain their sanity and sense of connection to the world beyond their suffering. More symbolically, the gardens represented hope and the persistence of life, even in the darkest circumstances. The lumenflower's ability to emit light in dark spaces paralleled Maria's own role as a source of compassion and humanity within the research hall's institutional darkness. Just as the flowers continued to bloom despite the hostile environment, Maria continued to express care and concern for the patients despite the constraints of her position. The specific choice of lumen flowers for these gardens reflects Maria's sophisticated understanding of symbolism and her desire to provide her patients with something that transcended mere decoration. These flowers, with their otherworldly glow and connection to cosmic forces, suggested possibilities for transcendence and enlightenment that existed outside the brutal experimental procedures being conducted within the facility. They offered a different vision of what contact with otherworldly forces might look like: beautiful, peaceful, and life-affirming, rather than destructive and dehumanizing. Maria's personal connection to lumen flowers is evidenced by the flower brooch she wears, which also appears on the doll's attire in The Hunter's Dream. This shared iconography suggests that the flowers held deep personal significance for Maria, representing not just her aesthetic preferences, but her fundamental values and worldview. The brooch serves as a declaration of her commitment to beauty and life, even in the face of surrounding darkness and death. The labor involved in maintaining the lumen flowers would have provided Maria with a form of meditative practice and personal refuge from the psychological demands of her position, though the extent of her direct involvement in their cultivation remains a matter of interpretation rather than established fact. What is certain is that tending to living plants, nurturing their growth, and creating beautiful spaces would have offered opportunities for positive action and creation in an environment otherwise dominated by experimentation and destruction. The patient's interactions with the gardens varied according to their individual conditions and stages of transformation. Some retained enough cognitive function to appreciate the beauty and symbolism of the flowers, finding comfort in their presence and the care that Maria had invested in creating these spaces. Others, whose minds had been altered by the experimental procedures, may have experienced the gardens differently, perceiving cosmic significance or otherworldly meaning in the flower's ethereal glow. One particularly poignant example of Maria's care appears in the lore surrounding the balcony key, which Maria gave to the patient Adeline. This key provided access to a balcony where Adeline could experience fresh air and the scent of flowers from the lumenflowers present in the research hall. The item description notes that Maria hoped Adeline would find comfort in these simple pleasures, though Adeline herself could not understand Maria's intentions due to her transformed mental state. This incident reveals both the nobility of Maria's intentions and the tragic limitations of her position. Her desire to provide comfort and natural beauty to suffering individuals was genuine and deeply felt. Yet the institutional context in which she operated made such gestures simultaneously meaningful and inadequate. The key to the balcony could offer momentary relief, but it could not address the fundamental cruelty of the system that had placed Adeline in her condition. The gardens also served as a form of passive resistance to the research hall's institutional culture. By creating and maintaining spaces dedicated purely to beauty and life, Maria was asserting values that stood in direct opposition to the facility's utilitarian approach to human existence. The gardens represented an implicit critique of the experimental program's reduction of human beings to research subjects, insisting instead on the inherent value of beauty, dignity, and natural life. The care and attention that Maria invested in the gardens would have been noticed by other staff members at the research hall, potentially creating tensions or conflicts with those who viewed such activities as wasteful or irrelevant to the facility's primary mission. Maria's insistence on maintaining the gardens may have been seen as a form of sentimentality or impractical idealism by colleagues who had become more thoroughly adapted to the institutional culture. However, the gardens' persistence and the continued reference to them in the lore suggests that they had a lasting impact on the research hall's environment and culture. Even other staff members, regardless of their personal views on Maria's activities, would have been forced to acknowledge the positive effect that the gardens had on patient morale and facility atmosphere. The gardens created a more humane environment that benefited everyone, even those who might not have appreciated their symbolic significance. The lumenflower's connection to cosmic forces and other worldly energies also raises questions about Maria's understanding of the experimental program's deeper purposes. Her choice to cultivate flowers that were themselves touched by supernatural influences suggests that she may have possessed insights into the nature of transcendence and cosmic contact that differed from the brutal approaches employed by the research hall's official experimental protocols. This interpretation suggests that Maria may have been conducting her own form of research into the possibilities for beneficial contact with otherworldly forces. Rather than forcing such contact through painful experimental procedures, she may have been exploring gentler approaches that worked with natural processes and respected the dignity of conscious beings. The gardens could be seen as experiments in their own right, testing whether beauty and care could facilitate forms of transcendence that were life-affirming rather than destructive. The ultimate fate of the gardens following Maria's suicide remains ambiguous, but their presence in the nightmare version of the research hall suggests that they had become permanently associated with her memory and influence. The flowers continue to bloom in the nightmare realm, serving as monuments to her attempts to preserve beauty and humanity within an inhuman system. Their persistence beyond death reflects the lasting impact of genuine care and the power of symbolic action to transcend individual mortality. The lumenflower gardens thus represent one of the most purely positive aspects of Maria's legacy, demonstrating that even within the most compromised circumstances, it is possible to create spaces of beauty, dignity, and life-affirming value. They serve as testimony to the persistence of human nobility, even under the most challenging conditions, and as symbols of hope that transcend the immediate contexts in which they were created. Chapter 13. The Music of Tragedy. The musical themes associated with Lady Maria, particularly her boss battle theme, provide another crucial layer to understanding her character and the tragic arc of her story. From Software's composers created a piece that not only accompanies one of the game's most memorable encounters, but also serves as an audio narrative that captures the essence of Maria's noble spirit, her profound guilt, and the desperate circumstances that drove her to her final stand in the Astral Clocktower. The composition itself is structured to reflect the three phases of Maria's boss battle, with each section building upon the previous themes while introducing new elements that correspond to her increasing desperation and the progressive abandonment of her moral constraints. This musical progression mirrors her character development throughout her life, beginning with elegant nobility and culminating in desperate, fire-enhanced fury that represents the complete overthrow of everything she once stood for. The orchestration during the opening phase establishes Maria's aristocratic heritage and the graceful warrior she was during her time as Gehrman's student. The melody carries hints of classical elegance that would be appropriate for Cainhurst nobility, yet it is underscored by darker tones that suggest the psychological burden she carries. This musical foundation reflects Maria as she existed before her moral compromises, skilled and noble, but already carrying the weight of knowledge and responsibility that would eventually destroy her. The musical climax that accompanies Maria's final phase, when she enhances her attacks with both blood and fire, represents the complete breakdown of her psychological constraints and the full expression of her desperate determination to prevent others from accessing the secrets she guards. The composition becomes more frantic and intense, reflecting both her physical desperation and the emotional extremity that has driven her to abandon all of her principles in service of her protective mission. While some sources suggest there may be vocal elements or lyrics that enhance the thematic content of Maria's musical theme, the specific details of any such lyrics and their translations remain subjects of interpretation rather than definitively established law. What is clear is that the musical composition effectively captures the emotional journey of her character arc. The orchestration during this final phase incorporates elements that suggest both transcendence and destruction, reflecting Maria's simultaneous achievement of supernatural power and complete departure from her original identity. The music captures the tragic irony of her situation. She has attained abilities beyond anything she possessed in life, but only by becoming something she would have despised during her living years. The composition treats this transformation as both spectacular and deeply mournful, acknowledging the power she displays while emphasizing the loss it represents. The emotional impact of the musical theme extends beyond its function as battle accompaniment, serving as a complete emotional arc that tells Maria's story independent of visual or narrative elements. Listeners who experience the music without the context of the boss battle can still perceive the progression from noble beauty to desperate tragedy that defines her character development. The composition stands as a complete artistic work that captures the essence of Maria's story in purely musical terms. The musical techniques employed in the composition reflect broader themes present throughout Bloodborne's soundtrack and the game's overall artistic vision. The combination of beautiful melodies with darker undertones mirrors the game's exploration of how noble intentions can lead to tragic consequences, while the progressive intensification of the musical theme reflects the escalating horror that characterizes the player's journey through increasingly disturbing revelations about the hunt and its institutional frameworks. The cultural influences apparent in the musical composition reflect the various sources that shaped Maria's character and story. Elements that suggest classical European musical traditions connect to her aristocratic Cainhurst heritage, while more modern orchestral techniques reflect the industrial and academic contexts in which she later operated. This musical synthesis mirrors Maria's own cultural position as someone who moved between different social and institutional worlds throughout her life. The lasting impact of Maria's musical theme extends beyond the immediate context of her boss battle, as the composition has become one of the most beloved and recognized pieces in Bloodborne's soundtrack. This popularity reflects the emotional resonance of her story, and the effectiveness of the musical composition in capturing the complex mixture of admiration, pity, and tragedy that characterizes players' responses to her character. The music serves as a memorial to Maria that transcends the specific context of the game, creating an artistic legacy that honors her nobility while acknowledging her flaws. The technical aspects of the musical composition demonstrate the care and attention that From Software's composers invested in creating a piece worthy of Maria's significance within the game's narrative. The layering of different instrumental parts, the careful timing of musical transitions to correspond with battle phases, and the integration of vocal elements all reflect a sophisticated understanding of how music can enhance and deepen narrative storytelling in interactive media. The emotional journey that the musical theme creates for players enhances their understanding of Maria's character and increases the emotional impact of the confrontation. Rather than simply providing atmospheric background for a combat encounter, the music actively participates in the storytelling process, offering insights into Maria's psychology and guiding players' emotional responses to her character. This integration of musical and narrative elements demonstrates the artistic maturity of video game storytelling and its ability to create complex, emotional experiences through the combination of multiple artistic media. Chapter 14. Legacy and Influence. The influence of Maria's story extends far beyond her immediate narrative context, establishing her as one of the most significant character studies in From Software's body of work. Her tragic arc serves as a comprehensive exploration of how noble individuals can be corrupted by institutional pressures, how good intentions can lead to devastating consequences, and how the pursuit of redemption can itself become a source of further moral compromise. While much of the specific details about her internal thoughts and motivations must be inferred from environmental storytelling and item descriptions, the broad outline of her story provides a powerful framework for understanding these themes. Maria's impact on the broader Bloodborne community has been profound and lasting, with players consistently ranking her among the game's most memorable and emotionally resonant characters. This popularity stems not just from the technical excellence of her boss battle or the aesthetic appeal of her design, but from the depth and complexity of her characterization and the universal themes her story explores. Her struggle with moral compromise, institutional complicity, and the search for redemption speaks to experiences and conflicts that resonate with players across different cultural and personal backgrounds. The influence of Maria's character design and fighting style can be seen in subsequent From Software games, where similar themes of noble warriors struggling with moral compromise appear in various forms. The archetype of the skilled, principled fighter who becomes corrupted by the systems they serve has become a recurring element in the studio's work, suggesting that Maria's story captured something essential about the relationship between individual agency and institutional power that continues to fascinate the game's creators. Academic and critical analysis of Maria's character has highlighted her significance as a representation of feminine strength that avoids many of the stereotypical presentations common in video game media. Her agency, competence, and moral complexity present a character whose gender is relevant to her story without defining or limiting her narrative possibilities. She serves as a powerful example of how female characters can be integral to game narratives while maintaining full psychological and moral complexity. The philosophical implications of Maria's story have generated extensive discussion and analysis within the gaming community and beyond. Her experience raises fundamental questions about moral responsibility within institutional frameworks, the possibility of meaningful individual action within corrupt systems, and the relationship between intention and consequence in moral evaluation. These themes connect her story to broader philosophical traditions while maintaining the specific context that makes her narrative compelling and emotionally resonant. Maria's weapons, particularly the Rakuyo, have become iconic within the Bloodborne community and have influenced weapon design in other games within the genre. The weapon's emphasis on skill and technique over supernatural enhancement has inspired similar designs that reward player investment and mastery rather than providing easy power increases. This design philosophy reflects Maria's own values and serves as a mechanical representation of her approach to achieving excellence through dedication and discipline. The research hall, as the location most closely associated with Maria's final years, has become one of the most analyzed and discussed areas in Bloodborne's DLC content. The environmental storytelling present in this location, much of which relates to Maria's influence and activities, has established new standards for how game environments can convey narrative information without relying on explicit exposition. The subtle details that reveal Maria's care for the patients and her attempts to humanize the facility demonstrate the power of environmental design to communicate complex character information. The relationship between Maria and the doll has generated extensive discussion about themes of memory, loss, and the ways in which grief can distort perception and motivation. This relationship serves as a case study in how video games can explore complex psychological themes through character interactions and environmental details, creating narrative depth that emerges from careful attention to seemingly minor elements rather than explicit dramatic moments. Maria's role as guardian of the Fishing Hamlet has established her as one of gaming's most complex moral obstacles, a character whose opposition to the player is entirely understandable and even admirable from her perspective. This moral ambiguity has influenced the design of subsequent boss encounters in various games, demonstrating how combat encounters can serve narrative and thematic purposes beyond simple tests of player skill or reflexes. The musical themes associated with Maria have become some of the most celebrated compositions in video game music, influencing both how game music is composed and how it is perceived by audiences. The integration of narrative themes into musical composition, particularly the way her boss theme tells her story through purely musical means, has demonstrated the potential for video game soundtracks to serve as standalone artistic works while enhancing the interactive experience. The broader influence of Maria's story on discussions of institutional complicity and moral compromise has extended beyond gaming contexts, with her character being referenced in academic discussions of ethics, institutional responsibility, and individual agency within large organizations. Her experience serves as a case study in how good individuals can become trapped within harmful systems and the psychological costs of attempting to maintain moral integrity within corrupt institutional frameworks. The lasting emotional impact of Maria's story has contributed to broader conversations about the potential for video games to create meaningful emotional experiences that rival those provided by other artistic media. Her character demonstrates that interactive entertainment can engage with serious themes and complex moral questions while maintaining the engagement and entertainment value that defines successful games. The technical aspects of Maria's presentation, from her character animation to her voice acting to the design of her combat encounters, have established new standards for how complex characters should be presented in video game contexts. The attention to detail in every aspect of her presentation demonstrates the importance of consistency and care in character development across all elements of game design. The community response to Maria's character has generated extensive fan art, fiction, analysis, and discussion that continues years after the game's release. This ongoing engagement demonstrates the depth and lasting appeal of her character, while contributing to the broader cultural impact of Bloodborne as an artistic work. The continued creativity and analysis that her story inspires reflects the richness of her characterization and the universal themes her narrative explores. Maria's influence on the development of video game storytelling can be seen in the increasing sophistication of character development and moral complexity in subsequent games across the industry. Her example has demonstrated that players are capable of engaging with nuanced moral questions and complex character psychology, encouraging developers to create more ambitious and emotionally sophisticated narratives. The legacy of Lady Maria thus extends far beyond her immediate role within Bloodborne, establishing her as a significant figure in the evolution of video game storytelling and character development. Her story serves as proof that interactive entertainment can engage with the most serious themes and complex moral questions while maintaining the engagement and technical excellence that define successful games. Through her tragedy, players encounter not just entertainment, but art that challenges moves and inspires long after the game has ended. Chapter 15, Eternal Vigil. As our deep exploration of Lady Maria's story draws to a close, we return to the image that defines her eternal existence. The noble hunter sitting motionless in her chair at the top of the Astral Clocktower, blood flowing perpetually from self-inflicted wounds, serving as guardian of secrets too terrible to be revealed. This final tableau encapsulates everything that made Maria both admirable and tragic, representing the ultimate expression of noble intentions, twisted by impossible circumstances into a form of eternal punishment. The Astral Clocktower itself serves as a perfect setting for Maria's final stand. Its astronomical instruments and massive clock face, representing humanity's attempts to understand and measure forces beyond normal comprehension. The tower's position at the pinnacle of the research hall emphasizes its role as the highest point of the church's transcendental ambitions, while its function as gateway to the Fishing Hamlet makes it the literal threshold between present corruption and original sin. Maria's choice to position herself at this threshold demonstrates the completeness of her acceptance of responsibility for the past, while simultaneously revealing the impossibility of her chosen solution. By preventing access to the Fishing Hamlet, she hopes to prevent others from confronting the truth of what happened there, believing that some knowledge is too dangerous to be revealed. Yet this very secrecy perpetuates the cycles of ignorance and institutional corruption that made the original atrocity possible. The physical presentation of Maria in her chair creates one of the most striking and memorable images in all of Bloodborne. Her regal bearing, even in apparent death, speaks to the nobility that defined her throughout her life. The continuous flow of blood from her wounds serves as a reminder of the violence that brought her to this state, while also suggesting the ongoing nature of her sacrifice. She exists in a state of perpetual dying, forever caught at the moment of her ultimate moral choice. The player's approach and Maria's subsequent awakening transform this static tableau into a dynamic confrontation that forces both characters to act according to their deepest convictions. Maria must fight to protect the secrets she died to guard, while the player must overcome a genuinely noble opponent whose motivations are entirely understandable and even admirable. This conflict represents one of the most morally complex boss encounters in video game history, as both participants can claim moral justification for their actions. The tragedy of this confrontation lies in its inevitability and the fact that both parties are ultimately acting according to noble intentions. Maria fights to prevent further harm and to protect others from the corrupting knowledge that destroyed her own life. The player seeks understanding and resolution, hoping to confront and possibly rectify the injustices of the past. Both are pursuing what they believe to be moral goods, yet their conflict seems unavoidable given their respective positions and commitments. Maria's final defeat, while necessary for the player's progression, represents a genuine loss of something valuable and irreplaceable. Her death breaks the final barrier protecting the secrets of the Fishing Hamlet, but it also destroys the last witness to those events who maintained full moral awareness of their significance. With Maria's final defeat, the last voice capable of providing ethical context for the historical atrocities is silenced, leaving only the raw facts of what occurred without the moral framework necessary to understand their significance. The aftermath of Maria's defeat reveals the broader implications of her protective efforts. The path to the Fishing Hamlet now lies open, allowing the player to confront the Orphan of Kos and potentially break the curse that has trapped the hunters in their nightmare. Yet this resolution comes at the cost of Maria's eternal vigil and the loss of her unique perspective on the events that shaped the nightmare's existence. The celestial dial that Maria's defeat provides serves as both key and symbol, representing the astronomical knowledge and cosmic awareness that characterized the research hall's experiments, while also serving as the literal tool needed to access the site of the original atrocity. The dial's astronomical significance connects it to the broader themes of human attempts to understand cosmic forces, while its function as a key emphasizes the unlocking of secrets that have been deliberately concealed. The opening of the path to the Fishing Hamlet following Maria's defeat creates a poignant parallel to her original journey to that location as part of the Bergenworth expedition, where once she traveled there as part of a group committed to the pursuit of knowledge, regardless of ethical constraints. Now others follow the same path in hopes of finding understanding and possibly redemption. The circular nature of this journey emphasizes the cyclical themes that run throughout Bloodborne's narrative. Maria's final words and actions demonstrate that even in defeat, her primary concern remains the protection of others rather than her own fate. Her recognition of the inevitability of the player's progress toward the Fishing Hamlet is accompanied by a hope that somehow the cycle of violence and revelation might be broken, that the truth might be confronted without perpetuating the harm that originally arose from its discovery. The player's acquisition of Maria's abilities and equipment following her defeat creates a complex relationship between victor and vanquished. By learning to fight like Maria and wielding her weapons, the player character inherits not just her tools, but aspects of her combat philosophy and approach to conflict. This inheritance raises questions about whether the player will be able to avoid the moral compromises that ultimately destroyed Maria, or whether they too will be corrupted by the systems they encounter. The broader implications of Maria's eternal vigil extend beyond the immediate context of her boss battle to encompass larger themes about memory, responsibility, and the relationship between past and present. Her role as guardian of historical secrets reflects the ongoing influence of past events on current circumstances, while her ultimate defeat suggests that confronting difficult truths, however painful, may be necessary for genuine progress and healing. The emotional impact of Maria's story resonates long after her defeat, as players are left to contemplate the complex moral questions her character raises. Her nobility and genuine good intentions make her sympathetic despite her role as obstacle to the player's progress, while her tragic fate serves as a warning about the potential costs of moral compromise and institutional complicity. The legacy of Maria's vigil continues to influence events even after her defeat, as the knowledge and abilities she guarded become available to others who may use them for better or worse purposes. Her story serves as both inspiration and cautionary tale, demonstrating the possibility of maintaining moral integrity under the most challenging circumstances, while also illustrating the limitations of individual action within corrupt institutional frameworks. The Astral Clocktower, even after Maria's defeat, remains a monument to her sacrifice and the complex moral questions her story raises. The tower's continued existence serves as a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge and understanding, while potentially valuable, must be balanced against considerations of ethics, responsibility, and the potential consequences of revelation. And so concludes our deep dive into the story of Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower. We've discovered the complete arc of a noble soul corrupted by the very institution she sought to serve, a skilled warrior whose greatest battles were fought against her own moral compromises, and a tragic guardian whose final sacrifice embodied both the nobility and futility of individual resistance to systematic corruption. Chapter 16: The Complete Tragedy. The story of Lady Maria represents one of the most complete character tragedies in video game storytelling, encompassing every element that defines classical tragic narratives while adding layers of complexity that are uniquely possible within interactive media. Her journey from noble aristocrat to legendary hunter to guilt-ridden guardian encompasses themes of moral compromise, institutional corruption, individual responsibility, and the search for redemption that resonate across cultures and time periods. Maria's aristocratic origins in Cainhurst provided her with advantages that most characters in Bloodborne's world could never access: education, resources, training, and social status that opened doors and created opportunities. Yet these same advantages also burdened her with expectations and responsibilities that would ultimately contribute to her downfall. Her noble heritage granted her the skills and knowledge necessary to become an exceptional hunter, but it also created the sense of duty and loyalty that would compel her to participate in atrocities she would never have chosen independently. The progression of her moral compromises follows a pattern that makes each step seem inevitable, while maintaining the tragic irony that other choices were always possible. Her departure from Cainhurst to join the Hunters represented a rejection of one form of corruption in favor of what seemed like a purer calling. Her training under Gehrman gave her skills and purpose that fulfilled her desire to serve noble ends. Her selection for the Fishing Hamlet expedition appeared to be recognition of her abilities and trustworthiness. Each step along her path was individually justifiable and even admirable, yet collectively they led her toward the greatest moral catastrophe of her life. The Fishing Hamlet massacre stands as the central traumatic event that defines everything that follows in Maria's story. This atrocity was not the result of sudden madness or evil intention, but rather emerged from the logical extension of institutional priorities and the gradual erosion of ethical constraints. The scholar's desire for knowledge, the hunter's loyalty to their mission, and the expedition's commitment to success combined to create circumstances where systematic violence became not just possible, but seemingly necessary from the participants' perspectives. Maria's participation in the massacre illustrates how good individuals can become complicit in evil systems through a combination of institutional pressure, personal loyalty, and the gradual normalization of increasingly questionable actions. Her skills as a hunter, developed through years of training for noble purposes, were perverted to serve genocidal ends. Her loyalty to Gehrman and her commitment to the mission prevented her from opposing actions that violated her fundamental moral principles. Her aristocratic sense of duty compelled her to see the mission through to its horrific conclusion, despite her growing awareness of its moral implications. The psychological aftermath of the massacre demonstrates the long-term consequences of moral compromise and the ways in which guilt can consume even the strongest individuals. Maria's disposal of the Rakuyo represents not just the rejection of a weapon, but the complete breakdown of her identity as a hunter and her sense of herself as a moral agent. The weapon that had symbolized her commitment to skill over supernatural shortcuts became contaminated by association with atrocity, making it impossible for her to continue wielding it without being confronted by her complicity in genocide. Her subsequent role at the research hall represents a desperate attempt at redemption that becomes instead another form of moral compromise. The genuine care and compassion she showed to the experimental subjects was real and meaningful, providing comfort and dignity to individuals who desperately needed both. Yet this same care was being exploited by the institutional framework to legitimize systematic abuse and to provide a veneer of humanity that made continued experimentation psychologically tolerable for both staff and observers. The patient's devotion to Maria creates one of the most poignant aspects of her story, as their genuine gratitude and affection highlight both the authenticity of her compassion and the inadequacy of her response to their suffering. Her small acts of kindness, the balcony key for Adeline, the lumenflower gardens, the gentle words of comfort, were drops of humanity in an ocean of institutional cruelty. While these gestures provided real comfort to individual patients, they also served to make the overall system of abuse more palatable and sustainable. Maria's suicide represents the ultimate expression of her moral agency and her final attempt to take responsibility for her actions while preventing further harm. By ending her own life, she removed herself from systems that had consistently corrupted her good intentions, while positioning herself as an eternal guardian against others making similar mistakes. Her death was simultaneously an escape from unbearable psychological pain and a sacrifice intended to protect others from the knowledge that had destroyed her. The transformation of Maria's suicide into eternal guardianship in the hunter's nightmare creates the final tragic irony of her story. Her noble intention to prevent others from accessing dangerous knowledge becomes another form of harmful obstruction, preventing the confrontation with truth that might actually resolve the underlying problems. Her protective instincts, which had been corrupted throughout her life by institutional frameworks, continue to operate in death in ways that perpetuate rather than resolve the cycles of violence and secrecy that had destroyed her. The encounter between Maria and the player character represents the culmination of all these tragic elements, creating a confrontation between two individuals who are both pursuing what they believe to be moral goods, but whose goals are fundamentally incompatible. Maria fights to protect secrets that she believes are too dangerous to be revealed, while the player seeks understanding and resolution that requires accessing those same secrets. Both can claim moral justification for their actions, yet their conflict seems unavoidable given their respective positions and commitments. The progressive abandonment of Maria's principles during the boss battle mirrors her life's arc in compressed form. She begins fighting with conventional hunter techniques that reflect her training and values, but is progressively forced to embrace the blood magic she had rejected, and ultimately to enhance her abilities with fire in ways that have no precedent in the lore. This escalation demonstrates her willingness to sacrifice everything she had once stood for in service of what she perceives as a greater good, recreating in miniature the pattern of moral compromise that had defined her entire existence. The inevitability of Maria's defeat, regardless of the player's intentions or skills, reflects the broader theme that individual resistance to systematic corruption, while admirable and necessary, is ultimately insufficient to create meaningful change. Maria's noble intentions, exceptional abilities, and genuine moral convictions could not overcome the institutional frameworks that shaped her choices and limited her options. Her defeat represents not just the failure of an individual, but the inadequacy of individual solutions to systematic problems. The legacy of Maria's story extends beyond her immediate narrative context to encompass broader themes about moral responsibility, institutional complicity, and the relationship between individual agency and systematic constraint. Her experience demonstrates how good individuals can be trapped within harmful systems and the psychological costs of attempting to maintain moral integrity within corrupt institutional frameworks. Her tragedy serves as both inspiration and warning, illustrating the possibility of nobility under the most challenging circumstances, while acknowledging the limitations of individual action. The enduring popularity and emotional impact of Maria's character reflects the universality of the themes her story explores and the sophistication of the storytelling techniques used to present her narrative. Her character demonstrates that video games can engage with the most serious moral and philosophical questions while maintaining the entertainment value and technical excellence that define successful interactive media. Through her tragedy, players encounter not just entertainment, but art that challenges, moves, and inspires. The complete story of Lady Maria thus stands as a masterpiece of character development and tragic storytelling, creating a narrative that is simultaneously specific to its fictional context and universal in its exploration of moral complexity and human fallibility. Her journey from noble intentions to tragic compromise to eternal guardianship encompasses the full range of human moral experience, while maintaining the hope that understanding these patterns might help others avoid similar fates. Conclusion: the Sea of Bitterness. As we reach the end of our extensive journey through the lore of Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower, we're left with a profound understanding of one of gaming's most complex and emotionally resonant characters. The name Maria, deriving from Latin origins meaning sea or bitterness, proves prophetic when we consider the full scope of her story. She truly became a sea of bitterness, not through malice or evil intention, but through the accumulation of moral compromises that gradually eroded her sense of self and purpose until only duty and guilt remained. Maria's story serves as a comprehensive examination of how noble intentions can be corrupted by institutional pressures, how individual agency operates within systematic constraints, and how the pursuit of redemption can itself become a source of further moral compromise. Her journey from Cainhurst aristocrat to legendary hunter to tormented guardian encompasses every aspect of the human moral experience, creating a character study that resonates far beyond its immediate fictional context. The tragic arc of her narrative demonstrates the sophistication that video game storytelling has achieved, proving that interactive media can engage with the most serious philosophical and moral questions while maintaining the entertainment value and technical excellence that define successful games. Maria's character exists at the intersection of classical tragic tradition and modern psychological realism, creating a figure who is simultaneously archetypal and utterly individual. Her influence on the broader Bloodborne narrative extends far beyond her immediate role as boss encounter or lore figure. Maria's story provides the emotional and moral center around which many of the game's themes revolve, from the corruption of noble institutions to the cyclical nature of violence and the search for redemption in a seemingly unredeemable world. Her presence shapes the experiences of other characters, influences the structure of the hunter's nightmare, and provides context for understanding the broader patterns of corruption and resistance that define the game's universe. The relationship between Maria and other significant figures, Gehrman, the doll, the research hall patients, and ultimately the player character, creates a web of connections that enriches every aspect of the game's storytelling. Her influence persists long after her death, shaping events and relationships in ways that demonstrate the lasting impact of individual choices and the complex ways in which past actions continue to influence present circumstances. The technical and artistic excellence with which Maria's story is presented, from her character design to her combat mechanics to her musical themes, establishes new standards for how complex characters should be developed and presented in video game contexts. Every aspect of her presentation, from the smallest environmental details to the most dramatic combat sequences, contributes to a coherent artistic vision that serves the larger narrative purposes while maintaining its own aesthetic integrity. The lasting emotional impact of Maria's story on players demonstrates the power of well-crafted interactive narratives to create meaningful experiences that extend far beyond the immediate context of gameplay. Her character has inspired extensive analysis, creative works, and ongoing discussion that continues years after the game's release, proving that video games can create cultural artifacts that endure and evolve in their significance over time. The moral complexity of Maria's choices and circumstances provides players with opportunities to examine their own ethical frameworks and consider how they might respond to similar pressures and conflicts. Her story raises questions that have no easy answers, forcing players to grapple with the ambiguity and difficulty of real moral decision-making, rather than providing simple moral lessons or clear distinctions between good and evil. The universal themes that Maria's story explores, guilt, redemption, moral compromise, institutional corruption, and the search for meaning in an imperfect world, ensure that her narrative will continue to resonate with new audiences and maintain its relevance across different cultural and temporal contexts. Her story speaks to fundamental aspects of human experience that transcend the specific details of her fictional circumstances. The legacy of Lady Maria extends beyond her immediate narrative to influence the development of video game storytelling as an artistic medium. Her character demonstrates that players are capable of engaging with sophisticated moral and psychological themes, encouraging developers to create more ambitious and emotionally complex narratives that challenge audiences while entertaining them. As we conclude this deep exploration of her story, we're reminded that the best tragic characters are those who maintain our sympathy and admiration, even as they make choices we cannot approve. Maria earns our respect through her nobility, our pity through her suffering, and our understanding through the impossible circumstances that shaped her choices. Her story serves as both entertainment and education, providing insights into the human condition while crafting a compelling narrative that exemplifies the artistic potential of interactive media. The portrait of Lady Maria that emerges from this comprehensive examination is that of a fundamentally noble individual who was gradually corrupted by the systems she sought to serve, whose attempts at redemption were consistently undermined by institutional frameworks that exploited her best qualities for harmful ends, and whose final sacrifice represents both the ultimate expression of her moral agency and the tragic inadequacy of individual solutions to systematic problems. Her eternal vigil in the Astral Clocktower stands as a monument to the complexity of moral choice and the persistent hope that individual acts of conscience, however flawed or insufficient they may be, still matter in the broader scheme of existence. Through her tragedy, we encounter not just a compelling fictional character, but a mirror for examining our own moral choices and the systems within which we operate. The story of Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower thus stands as a masterwork of character development and narrative construction, creating a figure who embodies the best possibilities of video game storytelling while exploring themes that resonate across all forms of human artistic expression. Her legacy continues to influence and inspire, ensuring that her sea of bitterness will continue to nourish new understanding and appreciation long after her final battle has been fought. We'll explore another fascinating figure from gaming's rich tapestry of tragic heroes and complex villains. Until then, keep exploring those epic tales, fellow adventurers, and remember that even in the darkest stories, there are always lessons to be learned about the nobility of the human spirit and the eternal struggle between our highest aspirations and our deepest failings. Thank you for joining me on this extensive journey through one of gaming's most compelling character studies. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Lady Maria's story, please like this video and subscribe for more comprehensive explorations of gaming's greatest narratives. Your support helps me continue creating these detailed examinations of the stories and characters that make our favorite games so memorable and meaningful.